4 different diseases, and you need to cure them before basically you die. Greetings, I'm Dr. Anson Poitras, a biology professor here at Houghton University, and today I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you about the board game Pandemic, which is a 2 to 4 player game designed by Matt Leacock. It was originally released in 2008 with a second edition that came out in 2013. And since then, this game has gone on to sell more than 2 million copies, and there are multiple expansions and legacy editions. This has been a very popular game, and so I'm really happy to be able to talk to you about some of the science there. But first, let's take a look at how the game is played. So Pandemic is a really unique game in the sense that this is a cooperative game. So most games people are used to, you play and then somebody wins at the end. You either count up points or somebody finishes first. But with Pandemic, everybody wins together or everybody loses at the same time. Which I think is a really cool thing. And for a lot of people who struggle with that win-loss kind of part of board games, sometimes this can be a really interesting way of kind of getting into gaming and enjoying it for the first time because it doesn't have that same kind of competitiveness against one another. You have to work together in order to get through the game. So the way the game works, I've got it set up right now for a 3-person game. But your goal is to cure 4 different diseases represented by 4 different colors on the board. There's a yellow, blue, black, and red. 4 different diseases, and you need to cure them before basically you die. You get wiped out as a group. And so that's the goal. And so on your turn, turns are pretty simple. There's 3 things that happen on your turn. You take some actions, you draw 2 cards, and then you kind of advance the disease, as it were. You advance kind of the spread of the disease. So what's really helpful is that every player gets one of these cards here. And so this talks about the kinds of actions you can take. On your turn, you can take 4 of these actions. So this side of the card talks about ways that you can move around the board. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. And then this talks about some other kind of more specialized things you can do, like building a research station or discovering a cure or treating a disease. So you're going to be going around the board, you're going to be trying to kind of remove these little disease cues, which show to some extent the severity of the disease spread. So how do you cure diseases if that's the goal? Well, each person starts with 3 cards like this. And so you'll notice that they are different colors, and each one is a different city, and those cities are locations on here. And what you need to do in order to cure disease is get 5 colors, 5 cards of the same color, and then turn them in. And when you've done that, then you've discovered the cure for that disease. You can go and flip that token down here, and you're on your way. So you need to be able to cure all 4 of those diseases in order to win the game, basically. And so that's it. You're going around, you're collecting cards that you hope will eventually help you cure diseases, and you're removing cubes here. So now the extra aspect of it, though, is at the end of your turn, you're going to draw new infection cards. So there's 2 new cities that come out in this case, and you're going to be placing cubes on new cities. So even as you're progressing and you're trying to kind of eliminate things, the disease is spreading. And so you're kind of doing this constant battle, this back and forth between, all right, moving towards a cure, but also making sure things kind of stay the same here. And things can get much, much worse. So as you draw cards, for example, occasionally you're going to draw an epidemic card, which makes things really bad for you. You increase your infection rate, which increases the number of cards you draw here. You risk things like outbreaks, where kind of an explosion of disease from a particular location. And as outbreaks occur, this kind of moves down this track until, well, that's bad. When you get to the skull and crossbones, that's bad news. Sorry, Nathaniel, I know. That's your jam. And so everything can kind of explode, and there's multiple different ways you can lose. The last thing is that each person also has a role, which gives them a certain power that they can do, which makes them a little bit different than everybody else. So you want to be maximizing each person's individual role in terms of helping you accomplish this. So I would be playing in this case as the quarantine specialist, and Nathaniel over here, he's got the medic. Although I don't know that he's doing a terribly good job of helping keep everybody alive. Got to step up your game, Nathaniel. come on by. So anyway, that's the way this is going. And so you just try and get all these cures, and then once everything is cured, no matter how many cubes are out here on the board, you win the game. And if you don't achieve those cures before, there's about 4 or 5 different ways that you can die horribly. But hopefully you achieve the cure, and as you get better at the game, there's ways you can increase the difficulty level as well. So that's the general way the game is played. There's a couple of other rules, but those are the basics of it. And so now let's talk a little bit about the science. So I had a couple of questions about this, and I actually phoned up Matt Leacock at home, and shout out to Matt Leacock, the designer of the game, and he answered my call and actually took some time out of his Sunday evening to answer some of my questions for me. So it was really helpful. So I asked him a little bit about how he picked the sites here, how he picked the cities for the board, and he mentioned a couple of different things. One was he was mostly looking at city size. He wanted to pick really large cities, but also distribution is important. So if he had relied solely on things like city size, then most of the board would have been over in Asia and India kind of thing. So he was mostly looking for larger population areas, larger population cities that also gave a pretty good distribution over a global map, with a couple of exceptions. There's a couple of interesting things. So one is the players always start in Atlanta because that's where the CDC is, the Center for Disease Control is. So that's a kind of a nice little Easter egg. The other thing is Montreal in the second edition is new. It used to be Toronto and got replaced with Montreal because Z-Man Games, who initially published the game, got bought out by another publisher who's located in Montreal. So it's kind of like a nod to them. And the other thing is the city of Essen, which is on here. And that is kind of like a little Easter egg to board gamers, because Essen is the site of one of the world's largest board game trading shows in the world. Happens every year, more than 200,000 people show up. So this is a very important city for board gamers. So anyway, I got to talk to him a little bit about it. One of the things he said was he was basically, as designing this, was mostly looking at trying to build a good game and not particularly interested on scientific accuracy. However, despite that, it turns out that I think there's a lot of things about the game that map on pretty well to our understanding of how diseases work and how pandemics work. So for example, short-term and long-term goals. So in order to win this game, you have to pay attention to what you're doing on your next turn. You have to pay attention to removing cubes, making sure things don't blow up out of proportion. However, if that's all you do, you will eventually lose this game. You've got to be working for a cure. You've got to be thinking long-term about how are we going to do that. So in the same thing, when there's a global issue, there's any kind of global pandemic, you've got both of those things at play, right? You've got to deal with the people who are sick right now, and how do we take care of them? How do we help them out? But also, what is this going to look like for us long-term? Can we start working on developing things like vaccines or other kinds of long-term care, treatment kinds of things? So both of those things have to be in play. The second thing that's really cool about this is the unpredictability. Each turn you flip over a card and you don't know which cities are going to be getting infected. And there's a lot of unpredictability when it comes to disease as well. We don't know where things are going to pop up, where people are going to get sick. We can try and guess, we can try and make predictions, but that lends itself both in real life and in the game to a certain amount of tension and anxiety, which actually play out really well in the game. And I think the game does a good job of introducing that in a healthy way. The one thing that is a little bit different is because there's a limited set of cards and you know what has been played and you know what's on the board, there is a certain amount of predictability as well. Although it's largely unpredictable, there are things you can make a pretty high probability guess on for some things, which doesn't necessarily map onto the reality of the situation. The next thing is the cooperation. This is a cooperative game, right? As I mentioned, you win or lose together. And a lot of times that's the way it works with disease. You win or lose together. What you do affects everybody else. And in the time of some kind of global large-scale event, it's really helpful if countries are working together on this. They're sharing resources, they're sharing genome data, they're sharing all this kind of stuff to try and help overcome this more quickly. Obviously, there's things like global politics and things that do not come into play in the board game that do affect the real life situation. But I do like that sense of like, we will do better at this. We will do better at dealing with disease if we work together. So the other thing that's not really represented here some of the tasks or the tactics or strategies that countries might take to help deal with disease, things like quarantine, other kinds of mitigation or closing borders or things like that can have an effect on the spread of disease, those are not really well represented. But that may be just due to the fact that you've got a limited amount of board time and space, and you don't want to make something that's too overly complex. So the next thing would be things like international travel. Nowadays, there's so much travel that one of the primary ways in which disease gets spread is international travel through airlines and stuff like that. Unfortunately, because of the way the game works, each of the individual colored diseases, the red disease, the black disease, they kind of stay localized. They stay within their particular region and are not really spreading. So that doesn't really match up with things. His use of urban centers, that's spot on, right? Disease primarily is going to spread in areas where there's a high populations. And so that use of cities in particular for the spread of disease, I think, is really good. And then lastly is, although there's a sense in which disease kind of grows and it just kind of grows and it can spiral in the game, a lot of times that still doesn't quite match on to what we see with the kinds of exponential growth in cases, particularly in things like pandemics or outbreaks or things like that. And so there is a reality to what's happening here on this game. There is that sense of this lack of control and the chaos that really comes with disease outbreaks. But at the same time, it's not exactly spot on, partly because it wasn't designed to be. But I still think it does a really good job of helping us understand how difficult it is to deal with something like this, and gives us at least a sense of that. So that's a little bit about the science behind this, and I think it's a fun game, it's a great game for people who are introduced to this, particularly this idea of cooperation, which is not something you see a lot of time. People are not really raised or have a lot of experience with cooperative games. And so I really like this game, and I like the basics of some of the science too, and the kinds of discussions that it could lead to about the science as a result of playing it. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I look forward to sharing some more games with you in the future.